Michael, Emma, and Jayden Carter, three siblings with sunlit smiles and summer dreams, raced through the entrance gates of Wonder World Amusement Park, their laughter carrying on the warm July breeze. Their parents, Sarah and Robert, watched with affectionate smiles as their children disappeared into the colorful crowd, promising to meet at the giant carousel in 3 hours. None of them could have imagined the nightmarish mystery that would unfold before sunset. A disappearance that would haunt the small town of Millfield for years to come. Behind the cheerful facade of Wonder World's twinkling lights and joyful music lurked a dark secret that would remain hidden for 6 long years, concealed in the shadows of the park's iconic Ferris wheel. Before we dive into this chilling tale of loss, discovery, and shocking revelations, comment below where you're watching from today. If you find yourself captivated by this true story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more extraordinary real-life mysteries that defy explanation. The summer of 2018 had been a season of record-breaking heat in Millfield, a modest town nestled between rolling hills and dense forests in the American Midwest. Families sought relief at the local community pool, and ice cream sales soared as the mercury climbed day after day. For the Carter family, the oppressive heat wave had become unbearable in their small ranch-style home, where the air conditioning struggled to keep pace with the relentless sun. "What do you say we take the kids to Wonder World tomorrow?" Robert suggested to his wife Sarah one evening as they sat on their porch, hoping to catch even the slightest breeze. "They've been cooped up for weeks, and we promised them a special trip this summer." Sarah hesitated, wiping sweat from her brow. "It's a long drive, and tickets aren't cheap," she replied, always the practical one in their partnership. As a nurse at Millfield General Hospital, Sarah was accustomed to weighing risks and benefits, to making careful assessments before taking action. Robert, a high school history teacher with a perpetual optimistic streak, reached for her hand. "I know, but I got that small bonus for coaching the debate team to regionals. Let's use it for this. The kids deserve something special, and so do you." From the kitchen window came the sounds of their children, Michael, 12, Emma, 10, and Jayden, 8, arguing over whose turn it was to choose the evening's board game. Their voices, despite the bickering, brought smiles to both parents' faces. "Okay," Sarah finally agreed, her expression softening. "Let's do it, but just for the day. We'll drive there and back." Robert beamed, already imagining the joy on their children's faces when they announced the surprise. Wonder World was the largest amusement park within a 3-hour drive, famous for its impressive roller coasters, water rides, and the magnificent starlight Ferris wheel that dominated the skyline. It was a place of childhood dreams, of cotton candy summers, and memories that lasted a lifetime. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, Sarah found herself checking the Wonder World website, reviewing the park map and safety procedures. Something about large crowds had always made her uneasy, a wariness she'd developed growing up in a much larger city before settling in Millfield. She studied the meeting points, noted the locations of first aid stations, and read about the park's security measures. "Everything okay?" Robert asked, finding her still at the computer well past midnight. Sarah nodded, closing the laptop. "Just doing my homework. You know me." Robert kissed the top of her head. "That's why our family runs like clockwork, my beautiful, cautious wife." The next morning brought exclamations of surprise and delight when the children learned of their destination. The 3-hour drive was filled with excited chatter about which rides they would try first. With Michael insisting that the Thunderbolt roller coaster was essential, Emma advocating for the log flume, and little Jayden, despite his bravado, admitting he might stick to the carousel and bumper cars. "Remember the rules," Sarah said, as they finally pulled into the vast parking lot of Wonder World. "Stay together at all times, keep your park map with you, and if you get separated, go." Immediately to the Lost Children Center by the main entrance. The children nodded impatiently, having heard their mother's safety instructions countless times before. Michael, the oldest, rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "Mom, I'm practically a teenager. I can look after Emma and Jayden. I don't need looking after," Emma protested, flipping her blonde braid over her shoulder with a look of indignation. "I'm 10 now." Jayden, still small for his 8 years, simply bounced in place, his attention already captured by the colorful attractions visible beyond the entrance gates. "We'll meet at the giant carousel at 3 p.m., Robert confirmed as he distributed the entry tickets. "Not a minute later, okay? Mom and I want to check out some of the shows, and then we'll all have dinner together before heading home." The children agreed readily, their minds already racing ahead to the adventures awaiting them. As they approached the entrance gates, Sarah felt a sudden, inexplicable chill despite the blazing summer heat. She reached out and pulled Jayden close, straightening his baseball cap. "You stay close to your brother and sister, okay, sweetheart?" Jayden nodded, his eyes wide with excitement. "I promise, Mom." With the last wave, the 3 Carter children merged into the crowd, their distinctive appearances: Michael's red hair, Emma's blonde braid, and Jayden's Spider-Man backpack, visible for just a few moments before they were swallowed by the sea of summer tourists. Sarah stood watching long after they had disappeared from view, that strange uneasiness refusing to dissipate. "They'll be fine," Robert assured her, gently guiding her toward the amphitheater, where a magic show was scheduled to begin in 20 minutes. "Michael is responsible, and they have their emergency phone if they need us." Sarah nodded, forcing herself to relax. It was just her natural parental anxiety, she told herself. The children deserved this independence, this day of carefree fun. With a deep breath, she allowed Robert to lead her away, unaware that this ordinary summer day was about to become the defining tragedy of their lives. The morning passed pleasantly for Sarah and Robert as they enjoyed the various shows and attractions. Designed for adults, they watched skilled acrobats, laughed at comedians, and even rode the scenic railway that circled the perimeter of the park. Throughout, Sarah checked her phone regularly, but there were no messages from the children. A good sign, she assured herself, as they sat sharing a pretzel under a shaded pavilion. Robert noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The cheerful calliope music that had been playing throughout the park suddenly stopped, replaced by an announcement requesting a code yellow response from park staff. Most visitors paid little attention to the cryptic message, but Sarah immediately tensed. "What's code yellow?" she asked a passing employee, a young woman in the bright Wonder World uniform. "Nothing to worry about, ma'am," the employee replied with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just a standard procedure." But Sarah's nursing instincts were on high alert. In hospitals, color codes were never nothing to worry about. They were carefully crafted signals to communicate emergencies without causing panic among patients and visitors. She glanced at her watch. 2:30 p.m., still 30 minutes before they were due to meet the children. "I think we should head to the carousel early," she told Robert, already gathering their belongings. Robert, sensing her anxiety, didn't argue. They made their way through the increasingly crowded pathways, navigating past families with strollers and groups of teenagers. As they approached the central plaza where the carousel spun in endless circles, Sarah's phone finally chimed with a message. Relief flooded through her as she unlocked the screen, expecting to see a text from Michael asking where they were or if they could stay longer. Instead, it was a park-wide alert. "Attention Wonder World guests. We are currently assisting in locating 3 missing children. If you have seen siblings Michael, 12, Emma, 10, and Jayden Carter, 8, please report to any staff member immediately." The world seemed to tilt beneath Sarah's feet as she read the names, their children's names, displayed on her phone. Robert, reading over her shoulder, let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a groan. "There must be some mistake," he whispered, his face suddenly ashen. But Sarah was already running toward the carousel, pushing through the crowds with desperate determination. Robert quickly caught up, and together they reached the meeting point, frantically scanning the area for any sign of their children's familiar faces. Instead, they found 2 park security officers and a police officer waiting for them. Their expressions grave. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter?" the police officer asked, though it was clear from their panicked faces that they were indeed the parents of the missing children. "Where are they?" Sarah demanded, her nurse's composure completely abandoned. "Where are our children?" The security officers exchanged glances before one stepped forward. "Ma'am, sir, we're doing everything possible to locate your children. They were last seen approximately 90 minutes ago near the Starlight Ferris wheel. A witness reported seeing them speaking with a park employee, but we've been unable to verify this information." "A park employee?" Robert repeated, confusion evident in his voice. "Why would they go with a staff member?" The police officer, whose name badge identified him as Officer Brennan, pulled out a small notebook. "That's what we're trying to determine. Can you tell us if your children had any reason to seek assistance? Were they injured or upset when you last saw them?" Sarah shook her head emphatically. "No, they were excited, happy, and Michael knows better than to go off with a stranger, even someone in uniform. He has our phone number. If there was a problem, he would have called us." As if summoned by her words, Sarah's phone began to ring. She fumbled with it, hope flaring briefly only to be extinguished when she saw it was the hospital calling. Probably about her shift tomorrow, a concern that now seemed trivial compared to the nightmare unfolding around them. "I need to take this," she said automatically, her professional habits momentarily overriding her distress. The brief conversation that followed would later haunt Sarah in her darkest moments. One of her colleagues was calling to check if she was still at Wonder World. Apparently, the news of missing children was already spreading through local channels. Sarah confirmed through numb lips that yes, they were her children, and no, they hadn't been found yet. When she ended the call, the search for the Carter children had been escalated to a full park lockdown. Guests were being held at exit points for questioning. Staff members were conducting systematic sweeps of all areas, and additional police units were arriving with search dogs. The next hours passed in a blur of questions, photographs, and increasingly desperate searches. Sarah and Robert provided recent pictures from their phones. Michael with his science fair project from just last week, Emma at her dance recital 2 months ago, Jayden proudly displaying a missing front tooth in a photo taken that very morning. They described what the children were wearing, their distinguishing features, their personalities and habits. The initial hope that the children had simply lost track of time or gone to the wrong meeting point faded as the summer sun began to set. Wonder World, typically closed by 8 p.m., remained fully illuminated and staffed as the search continued into the night. Volunteers from Millfield and surrounding communities arrived to help, forming search parties that combed every inch of the 200-acre park and its surrounding woodlands. Local media descended quickly, the disappearance of 3 children being the kind of story that demanded coverage. Sarah and Robert found themselves thrust before cameras, pleading for information, their faces reflecting a pain so raw it was difficult for viewers to witness. "Please," Sarah begged, her voice breaking as she addressed not just the cameras but whoever might be responsible. "They're just children. Michael has asthma and needs his inhaler. Emma's afraid of the dark. Jayden, he's just a baby, only 8 years old. Please, if anyone knows anything." Robert, standing beside her with an arm around her shoulders, couldn't speak at all, tears streaming unchecked down his face. By midnight, the FBI had been called in, transforming the disappearance from a local emergency to a potential interstate kidnapping. Agent Diana Morrison, a specialist in child abductions, arrived with her team, establishing a command center in the Wonder World administrative offices. We're implementing what we call the first critical hours protocol, Agent Morrison explained to the shell-shocked parents. Statistically, most abducted children who are recovered safely are found within the first 24 hours. We're treating this as our highest priority. Her words, while meant to reassure, carried an implicit acknowledgement of what might happen if the children weren't found within that crucial window. As dawn broke over Wonder World the following day, the search had yielded nothing but a single puzzling clue: Jayden's Spider-Man backpack, discovered in a maintenance area behind the Starlight. Ferris wheel. The backpack contained his asthma inhaler, a park map, and a half-eaten package of fruit snacks, but no indication of what had happened to him or his siblings. The area where the backpack was found became the focal point of the investigation. It was a restricted zone accessible only to park employees, hidden from public view by tall privacy fences and vegetation. How Jayden's backpack ended up there, and why, became the central mystery in a case rapidly filling with unanswered questions. Park records showed that 5 maintenance workers had been scheduled in that area on the day of the disappearance. Each was extensively interviewed, their backgrounds scrutinized, their movements throughout the day reconstructed minute by minute. None emerged as obvious suspects, though 2 had minor criminal records for possession of marijuana. Hardly. The profile of child abductors. The investigation expanded to include all Wonder World employees who had been working that day. Over 300 individuals. Concurrently, officers reviewed hundreds of hours of security footage, though the area behind the Ferris wheel, crucially, was not covered by cameras. For Sarah and Robert Carter, the agony of not knowing was becoming unbearable. They had not left the park since their children's disappearance, existing in a suspended state of shock and grief, sleeping in brief snatches on cots provided by the Red Cross, barely eating despite the constant offerings of food from concerned community members. On the morning of the 3rd day, as hope began to flicker like a candle in a strong wind, Officer Brennan approached them with news that would only deepen the mystery. "We've confirmed something unusual," he said, his expression troubled. According to park records and witness statements, there was an employee reported in the Ferris wheel area who wasn't officially scheduled to work that day. A man in a maintenance uniform who several guests noticed because he was wearing a Wonder World hat that seemed new, still with the price tag attached. Sarah straightened, suddenly alert. Did anyone get a good look at him? A description. "Middle-aged, average height and build," Officer Brennan replied, frustration evident in his tone. "Nothing distinctive enough to create a useful composite. But here's what's concerning. None of the regular maintenance staff recognize this description as a colleague." Robert, who had been silent for hours, looked up sharply. "Are you saying someone was impersonating a Wonder World employee?" The implication hung heavy in the air. If someone had gone to the trouble of obtaining a park uniform to blend in with staff, it suggested a level of premeditation that transformed the disappearance from a possible opportunity crime to a carefully planned abduction. As this new information rippled through the investigation, the media coverage intensified. The Carter children's faces appeared on national news broadcasts, their smiling school photographs contrasted against the growing number of days on the missing counter. The story captured the nation's attention. 3 siblings vanishing in broad daylight from a crowded amusement park, leaving virtually no trace. Wonder World executives, initially cooperative, began to show signs of strain as the investigation focused increasingly on potential security failures within their operation. Who had access to maintenance uniforms? How was the restricted area secured? Why were there no cameras monitoring the back of their flagship attraction? While the corporate team began consulting with crisis management firms, the park's everyday employees showed genuine distress and determination to help. Many volunteered their off-duty hours to assist with searches, distribute flyers, or simply sit with Sarah and Robert, offering what little comfort was possible in such circumstances. One such employee was Marcus Webb, a 20-year veteran of Wonder World's operations department. On the fourth day of the search, he approached the Carters with something he had been reluctant to share with investigators. "I'm probably going to get fired for telling you this," he said, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "But there's an old tunnel system beneath part of the park, including under the Ferris wheel. It was part of the original construction back in the 1960s, used for maintenance and utility access. Most of it was sealed off years ago for safety reasons, but some of us old-timers know it's still accessible if you know where to look." Sarah gripped Marcus's arm, her eyes suddenly blazing with a desperate hope. "Have you told the police this?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Management doesn't like to acknowledge the tunnels exist, insurance liability and all that. I mentioned it to one of the officers, but I don't think they took it seriously. They're focused on the idea that whoever took your kids must have transported them out of the park." Within the hour, Agent Morrison had assembled a team to explore the tunnel system, with Marcus Webb reluctantly leading the way. The entrance was concealed behind what appeared to be a permanently locked utility door in the same maintenance area, where Jayden's backpack had been found. The search of the dark, abandoned tunnels yielded no sign of the Carter children, but confirmed something equally disturbing. Someone had recently been using the space. Fresh footprints in the dust, candy wrappers that hadn't yet collected dust, and most alarmingly, 3 small water bottles lined up neatly on a makeshift shelf. The exact number and brand that Sarah had packed for her children that day. "They were here?" Sarah whispered, staring at the water bottles, each with labels showing the Wonder World logo. "Our babies were down here in the dark." The discovery shifted the investigation's focus dramatically. If the children had been held temporarily in the tunnels, it suggested they might still be somewhere on the property, or that their abductor had intimate knowledge of the park's hidden infrastructure, potentially a current or former employee, with access and awareness that the average visitor or even most staff members would not possess. As the search expanded to include every inch of the tunnel system and all connected spaces, media attention reached a fever pitch. Wonder World, once synonymous with family fun and childhood joy, was now being portrayed as a place of hidden dangers and corporate negligence. On the 6th day after the disappearance, with hope fading and the investigation seemingly stalled, Sarah and Robert Carter appeared on national television in a last, desperate appeal. Sarah, her face gaunt from sleepless nights and constant worry, spoke directly to the camera, her voice remarkably steady despite her visible exhaustion. "To whoever has our children, please understand that Michael, Emma, and Jayden are not just names on the news. They are our world. Michael loves science and wants to be an astronaut. He collects rocks and knows all their scientific names. Emma is our dancer, our artist. Her room is filled with drawings she made for each of us. And Jayden, our youngest, still sleeps with his stuffed penguin named Admiral Flippers." Her composure finally broke. "Please, they need each other. They need us, and we need them. We won't ask questions. We just want them home." The interview, broadcast during prime time, generated thousands of tips from across the country. Most were well-intentioned, but ultimately unhelpful. Supposed sightings in places far from Millfield, psychic claims, conspiracy theories about underground trafficking rings. But one call, received by the FBI tip line just hours after the broadcast, stood out. The caller, who refused to identify himself, claimed to have seen a maintenance worker loading 3 large equipment cases into a van behind the Ferris wheel on the day of the disappearance. The caller hadn't thought anything of it at the time, but became suspicious after seeing the parents' plea. "The cases were big enough," the anonymous tipster said, his voice disguised by what sounded like a voice modulator. "And the guy was struggling with them, like they were heavier than they should have been. I remember thinking it was weird because the van didn't have Wonder World logos on it like the other maintenance vehicles. When pressed for more details, particularly why he hadn't come forward earlier, the caller abruptly ended the communication. Attempts to trace the call led to a burner phone purchased with cash at a gas station 30 miles from Millfield. The new lead prompted another thorough search of the area behind the Ferris wheel, including ground-penetrating radar and cadaver. Dogs, a development that Sarah and Robert found almost impossible to bear. The thought that their children might not be found alive was becoming an unbearable reality they weren't yet ready to face. As the one-week mark of the disappearance approached, the FBI began to transition from an active rescue operation to a long-term missing persons investigation. The command center at Wonder World was scaled back. Additional officers returned to their regular duties, and Agent Morrison prepared to have the difficult conversation with the Carters about managing expectations as the case continued. But before that conversation could take place, a discovery was made that would transform everything they thought they knew about the fate of Michael, Emma, and Jayden Carter. A discovery that would lead investigators down a path darker and more twisted than anyone could have imagined. 6 years passed with agonizing slowness for Sarah and Robert Carter. 6 years of birthdays without candles to blow out, of Christmas mornings without excited footsteps racing down the stairs, of school years beginning without new backpacks and first-day photos. The disappearance of their 3 children from Wonder World Amusement Park had transformed their lives into a stark division of before and after. Everything measured by that single summer day when Michael, Emma, and Jayden vanished without a trace. Their modest ranch-style home in Millfield, once filled with laughter and sibling squabbles, had become a shrine of sorts. Sarah had preserved the children's rooms exactly as they'd left them, Michael's space shuttle model suspended from the ceiling, Emma's dance ribbons displayed on her bulletin board, Jayden's collection of dinosaur figurines lined up on his windowsill. Some well-meaning friends had suggested that moving on might mean redecorating, converting the spaces to new uses. But Sarah had reacted with such visceral horror that no one dared mention it again. "They might come home," she would say simply. "They need to know we were waiting for them." The initial flurry of activity surrounding the disappearance, the searches, the press conferences, the nationwide alerts, had gradually dwindled as days stretched into weeks, then months, then years. The FBI case remained open, but had long since gone cold, relegated to file boxes and occasional reviews when similar cases emerged elsewhere in the country. Agent Morrison, who had maintained regular contact with the Carters in the first year, had eventually been reassigned to other cases, other missing children, other desperate parents. Wonder World itself had never fully recovered from the scandal. Attendance plummeted in the immediate aftermath of the disappearance, with many families unwilling to visit a place associated with such a disturbing event. The park's ownership had changed hands twice since 2018, each new management team promising enhanced security measures and attempting to rehabilitate the park's tarnished image. They had eventually renamed it Dreamland Adventures, complete with a new logo and branding that conspicuously avoided any visual reminders of the original Wonder World aesthetic. For Sarah, the years had passed in a fog of grief punctuated by brief, desperate moments of hope. Every time a news story broke about children found years after their abductions, she would feel that familiar surge of possibility. Could it be them? Had someone finally discovered where they were being held? Each time, the disappointment that followed drove her deeper into herself. Robert had coped differently. After the first year, he had thrown himself into his work at Millfield High School, taking on additional coaching responsibilities and eventually becoming the school's vice principal. His colleagues marveled at his tireless work ethic, not fully understanding that every minute spent focused on other people's children was a minute he didn't have to think about his own. At home, he moved carefully around Sarah's grief, their marriage having evolved into something more like a partnership between survivors of the same disaster. On the 6th anniversary of the disappearance, Sarah woke before dawn, as she always did on this date. She slipped out of bed, leaving Robert sleeping fitfully, and made her way through the quiet house to the kitchen. The familiar ritual had become a private ceremony over the years. Coffee brewed exactly as it had been that morning. Breakfast. Preparations for 5 people instead of 2. As she cracked eggs into a bowl, Sarah glanced at the calendar on the refrigerator door. In her meticulous handwriting, 3 names were written on this day's square: Michael, 18, Emma, 16, Jayden, 14. The ages in parentheses had been updated each year, a painful acknowledgement of the time that continued to pass in their absence. Michael would be finishing high school now, probably applying to colleges, perhaps still dreaming of becoming an astronaut. Emma would be in the midst of teenage life, maybe still dancing, perhaps with a boyfriend or planning for prom. Jayden, her baby, would be in middle school, his stuffed penguin likely relegated to a closet shelf, too embarrassing for a 14-year-old boy to admit he still cherished. Sarah was so lost in these imagined futures that she didn't hear Robert enter the kitchen until he spoke. "You're up early," he said softly, his voice still raspy with sleep. His hair, once dark brown, was now liberally streaked with grey, and fine lines had formed around his eyes, the physical manifestation of 6 years of waiting, wondering, and gradually losing hope. Sarah nodded, turning back to the eggs. "I thought we might go to the Memorial Garden this morning before it gets too hot." The Memorial Garden had been created by the Millfield community in the town's central park, a peaceful space with 3 flowering cherry trees planted in honor of the Carter children. A small plaque bore their names and the date of their disappearance, along with the words, "Hope blooms eternal." Sarah visited regularly, finding some measure of comfort in the living memorial, especially in spring when the trees exploded into delicate pink blossoms. Robert crossed the kitchen and wrapped his arms around Sarah from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Of course," he agreed, "and then I thought maybe we could drive up to Lake Millfield for the afternoon, get out of the house, maybe have a picnic." Sarah stiffened slightly. They had always spent the entire anniversary day at home, moving between the children's rooms, looking through photo albums, keeping their phones close in case, by some miracle. This would be the day news finally came. "I don't know if I want to go out," she said cautiously. Robert released her and moved to start the coffee maker, though Sarah had already prepared it. "I think it might be good for us this year," he suggested. "Just a change." "The therapist said—" "I know what Dr. Winters said," Sarah interrupted, her tone sharper than intended. Robert had started seeing a grief counselor the previous year, something Sarah had refused to do. In her mind, grief counseling implied acceptance that her children were gone forever, and she wasn't ready for that, might never be ready. Robert didn't press the issue. After 6 years, he had learned which battles were worth fighting and which were better left alone. Instead, he changed the subject. "I invited Jim and Karen for dinner tomorrow," he said, referring to their neighbors and closest friends. "Karen insisted on cooking, so they'll bring everything over." Sarah nodded, appreciating Robert's effort. The first few anniversaries, they had isolated themselves completely, unable to bear well-intentioned expressions of sympathy, or worse, the awkward discomfort of friends who didn't know what to say. But eventually, they had learned that allowing a few trusted people into their grief made the burden marginally lighter. As the morning progressed, they followed their ritual, a quiet breakfast, then separate showers before driving to the Memorial Garden. Sarah brought fresh flowers, arranging them carefully at the base of each tree. They stood together in silence, each lost in private thoughts and memories, until the increasing heat of the July day drove them back to their air-conditioned car. "Just for an hour or two," Robert suggested again as they pulled away from the curb. "The lake will be peaceful on a weekday. We can sit under that big oak on the north shore." Sarah looked out the window at the familiar streets of Millfield passing by. Perhaps Robert was right. Perhaps after 6 years it was time to create new rituals, ones that honored their children but didn't leave her feeling hollowed out for days afterward. "Okay," she conceded quietly, "but just for a little while." Robert reached across the console and squeezed her hand, a small victory in his ongoing battle to help both of them find a way to live with their loss. 4 miles across town, in an office cluttered with blueprints and maintenance schedules, Ray Dunleavy stood in front of a wall-mounted map of Dreamland Adventures, formerly Wonder World. As the new head of maintenance for the park, Ray had spent the past 3 weeks familiarizing himself with every inch of the sprawling property, the visible structures that delighted guests and the hidden infrastructure that kept everything functioning smoothly. At 52, Ray had spent most of his career working at larger theme parks in Florida and California before accepting this position in the Midwest. The job offer had come at the perfect time, just as his divorce was being finalized, and he found himself craving a fresh start, away from the memories and mutual friends he shared with his ex-wife. Dreamland Adventures was smaller than the parks he was accustomed to, but the challenge of helping rehabilitate its reputation appealed to his problem-solving nature. "All right, Tyler," Ray said to the young assistant shadowing him. "Today we're going to tackle the Starlight Ferris wheel. Management wants a complete structural inspection before the August festival." Tyler nodded, making a note on his tablet. "That's the original one from when it was Wonder World, right?" "One of the few attractions they kept," Ray confirmed. "Too iconic to replace, I guess, but they've updated all the mechanical systems since then." As they headed out of the office toward the towering Ferris wheel that dominated the park's skyline, Ray noticed Tyler's hesitation. "Something on your mind, kid?" Tyler glanced around, despite the fact that they were alone in the service corridor. "It's just, today's the anniversary, isn't it, of those kids who went missing." Ray slowed his pace. He'd been briefed on the park's troubled history when he accepted the position, of course. The disappearance of the Carter children was an unavoidable topic during his orientation, a cautionary tale about security protocols and crisis management. But he hadn't realized the significance of today's date. 6 years ago today, Tyler continued, when Ray didn't immediately respond. "I was just a teenager when it happened, but I remember it was all over the news. My mom wouldn't let me go to any amusement parks for like 2 years afterward." Ray nodded thoughtfully. "Understandable. It's every parent's worst nightmare." He'd been in Orlando when the news broke, watching the coverage with a sick feeling in his stomach. As a father himself, he couldn't imagine the hell those parents had endured, were still enduring. They continued toward the Ferris wheel in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The park wouldn't open to guests for another 2 hours, giving them time to conduct their inspection without interruption. As they approached the massive structure, Ray studied it with a professional eye. The sweeping steel supports, the carefully balanced wheel mechanism, the rows of gondolas swaying gently in the morning breeze. "We'll need to check the foundation bolts first," Ray instructed, leading Tyler toward the control booth at the base of the attraction. "Then work our way up, examining each stress point and connection." The control booth was locked, as expected. Ray used his master key to open it, stepping into the small space filled with switches, monitors, and the main control panel. Tyler followed, immediately beginning to photograph the current state of the equipment for their records. "These panels were all replaced last year," Tyler informed him, reading from the maintenance log displayed on his tablet. "But there have been reports of intermittent electrical issues during heavy rain." Ray nodded, making a mental note to check the waterproofing around the electrical conduits. "Let's start with the foundation inspection and work our way up." For the next hour, they methodically examined the massive structure, Ray occasionally climbing up to check connection points while Tyler documented their findings. The work was precise and demanding, requiring full concentration, the kind of focused task that Ray had always found satisfying. By mid-morning, they had completed the lower third of their inspection. Ray wiped sweat from his forehead, the July heat already becoming oppressive despite the early hour. "Let's take a water break before we tackle the main support column," he suggested. They retreated to the relative coolness of the control booth, where Tyler pulled 2 water bottles from his backpack. As Ray drank deeply, he gazed out at the empty park, imagining how different it must have looked 6 years ago today, crowded with summer visitors, filled with the sounds of excited children and calliope music. "You know what I never understood about the whole thing," Tyler said suddenly. "How 3 kids could just vanish in a crowded park. I mean, somebody must have seen something." Ray shrugged. "People see what they expect to see. A maintenance worker leading kids somewhere wouldn't raise alarm bells. That's what made it so disturbing. Whoever took them knew how to blend in." Tyler's eyes widened slightly. "You've really thought about this?" "Hard not to in our line of work," Ray replied. "Every theme park in the country reviewed their security protocols after what happened here. It changed the whole industry." Finishing his water, Ray crumpled the plastic bottle and tossed it into the recycling bin. "All right, back to work. I want to check behind the wheel support structure before we move up." The area behind the Ferris wheel was partially concealed by decorative landscaping, tall ornamental grasses, and flowering shrubs that created a visual barrier between the attraction and a service path. Ray pushed through the foliage, inspecting the massive concrete footings that anchored the structure to the ground. "Looks solid," he called back to Tyler. "No signs of cracking or water damage." As Ray worked his way around the base, his flashlight beam swept across something unusual, a section of the concrete that appeared different from the rest. Crouching down for a closer look, he realized it was a small maintenance hatch, almost completely obscured by overgrowth and dirt. "Hey, Tyler," he called. "Is there a basement level or utility access point shown on your diagrams?" Tyler consulted, his tablet frowning. "Nothing listed for this section. Maybe it's an old access point that's been decommissioned." Ray's curiosity was piqued. In his experience, undocumented access points were rarely good news. They meant either sloppy record-keeping or deliberate omissions, neither of which inspired confidence. Brushing away years of accumulated dirt and plant debris, he found a small, rusted padlock securing the hatch. "Hand me the bolt cutters from the toolkit," he requested, his decision already made. As the head of maintenance, investigating unlisted access points was absolutely within his purview, potentially a safety issue that needed documentation. Tyler returned with the bolt cutters, watching nervously as Ray positioned them around the corroded padlock. "Shouldn't we check with management first?" Ray shook his head. "If there's an undocumented access under a major attraction, we need to know about it immediately. Could be a structural concern." With a single, powerful squeeze, the old lock gave way, falling to the ground in 2 pieces. Ray pried open the hatch, revealing a narrow ladder descending into darkness. The stale air that wafted up carried the unmistakable smell of long undisturbed space, dust, mildew, and something else Ray couldn't immediately identify. "Get me the high-beam flashlight and the portable air quality monitor," Ray instructed, his professional instincts taking over. "And call Jacobs in security. Tell him we've found an unmarked access point that needs investigation." While Tyler made the call, Ray shone his standard flashlight down the opening, trying to gauge the depth. The beam disappeared into darkness, suggesting the tunnel or room below was larger than a simple utility access would require. "Security's sending someone over," Tyler reported, returning with the requested equipment. Jacob sounded weird about it, said to wait for him before going down. Ray's eyebrows raised slightly. "Did he know about this access point?" Tyler shrugged. "He didn't say, but he definitely reacted when I described where we found it." A strange feeling settled in Ray's stomach, something between professional concern and a more primal unease. In his 20-plus years working at theme parks, he'd encountered his share of unusual situations, but something about this discovery felt different. Perhaps it was the significance of the day, or Tyler's earlier mention of the missing children. But Ray found himself reluctant to wait for security before investigating further. "Hold this," he said, handing Tyler the air monitor. "I'm going to take a quick look, just to make sure there's no immediate safety hazard." Before Tyler could protest, Ray had swung his legs into the opening and begun descending the metal ladder, the powerful beam of the high-beam flashlight illuminating his way. The ladder extended about 15 feet down, ending in what appeared to be a small concrete room with a single tunnel extending from it. As Ray's boots touched the floor, he swept the flashlight around, taking in the space. It was approximately 10 feet square, with unfinished concrete walls and a low ceiling. A thick layer of dust covered the floor, except for what appeared to be a path of disturbance leading toward the tunnel, as if someone had walked through recently. "What do you see?" Tyler called down, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "Some kind of access room," Ray replied, moving toward the tunnel entrance. "Leads to a passage, probably part of the original utility system." The tunnel was tall enough for Ray to stand upright, though he had to duck his head slightly. As he shone his flashlight down its length, he could see it extended at least 30 feet before curving out of sight. The air quality monitor in Tyler's hand began to beep faintly, suggesting the oxygen levels were within safe parameters but not ideal. Ray's professional judgment told him to retreat, to wait for security as instructed. But something compelled him forward, a nagging feeling he couldn't quite define. Taking a deep breath of the stale air, he stepped into the tunnel, the beam of his flashlight leading the way. "Ray, security's almost here," Tyler called down. "You should come back up." "Just checking where this leads," Ray called back, his voice echoing oddly in the tunnel. 2 minutes max." As he moved deeper into the passage, Ray noticed painted markings on the walls, faded arrows and numbers that suggested this had once been a regularly used maintenance route. The tunnel curved slightly to the right, following what Ray assumed was the circumference of the Ferris wheel's foundation above. After about 50 feet, the tunnel opened into another room, larger than the first. Ray's flashlight beam revealed something that made him stop in his tracks, a small table pushed against one wall, with what appeared to be a child-sized chair beside it. On the table's dusty surface lay a few objects that seemed bizarrely out of place in this forgotten subterranean space. A faded Spider-Man backpack, a notebook with a ballerina on the cover, and what looked like a small model rocket. Ray's blood ran cold as recognition dawned. The descriptions of the missing children's personal items had been part of the national news coverage 6 years ago, items that had never been recovered. Michael's science project, Emma's dance notebook, Jayden's Spider-Man backpack. Here they were, carefully arranged as if waiting for their owners to return. Behind the table, Ray's flashlight beam revealed something that made his heart skip a beat. A wall covered with Polaroid photographs, yellowed with age but still clearly visible. Photos of 3 children, a red-haired boy, a blonde girl, and a smaller dark-haired boy, in what appeared to be this very room. Their expressions ranged from terrified to resigned, a visual timeline of captivity that Ray could barely comprehend. And, scrawled on the wall beside the photos, in what looked like crayon, were three simple words that sent a chill down Ray's spine. Nobody heard us. Ray's hand trembled as he snapped photos of the hidden room with his phone. Each flash illuminated the grotesque tableau, children's belongings arranged with disturbing precision, Polaroids documenting captivity, and that haunting message scrawled on the wall. Nobody heard us. His mind raced through possibilities, each more horrifying than the last. Had the Carter children been held captive here, directly beneath the feet of thousands of visitors? How long had they survived in this underground prison? And most chillingly, who had imprisoned them here? Ray. Tyler's voice echoed down from the hatch opening above. "Security's here. They want you to come up right away." Ray took one final sweeping photo of the room before reluctantly turning back toward the tunnel. His professional instincts urged him to preserve the scene exactly as he'd found it. This was evidence of something unimaginable. "I'm coming up," he called, his voice sounding strange in his own ears. As Ray emerged from the hatch, blinking in the sudden brightness of the summer morning, he found himself facing not just Tyler, but three security personnel. The lead officer, whose name badge identified him as Jacobs, had a rigid expression that immediately put Ray on edge. "Mr. Dunleavy," Jacobs said formally, "I understand you've accessed an unauthorized maintenance area." Ray studied the security chief's face, searching for some acknowledgement of the horror below. Finding none, he realized with growing unease that Jacob's primary concern seemed to be the breach of protocol, not what the breach had uncovered. "There's evidence down there," Ray stated flatly, holding up his phone. "Evidence related to the Carter children's disappearance. We need to call the police immediately." Jacobs extended his hand. "I'll need your phone, sir." The request hung in the air between them, its implications clear. Ray took an instinctive step backward, clutching his phone more tightly. "This is a crime scene," Ray insisted, his voice rising. "There are photographs down there, photographs of those missing kids, their belongings, messages they wrote. Someone kept them prisoner right under this park." Tyler's sharp intake of breath was the only sound for several seconds. The younger man looked from Ray to the security team, confusion and alarm evident in his expression. "Mr. Dunleavy," Jacob said, his tone now dangerously calm, "Dreamland Adventures takes all security concerns seriously. We appreciate your diligence, but this matter falls under our jurisdiction. Your phone, please." Ray's mind raced. Something wasn't right. The security team's response was all wrong. There should be shock, urgency, immediate action to contact law enforcement. Instead, he felt as though he'd stumbled into some carefully orchestrated containment operation. In that moment, Ray made a snap decision that would change everything. He slipped his phone into his pocket and shook his head. "I think I'll hold on to it," he said evenly. "In fact, I think the Millfield Police Department will be very interested in these photos and in your reaction to them." The change in Jacobs was instant and alarming. His professionally neutral expression hardened into something cold and calculating. With a subtle nod to his colleagues, he stepped forward. "This is park property, Mr. Dunleavy. Anything you photograph while on duty belongs to Dreamland Adventures. I'm afraid I must insist." Ray turned to Tyler, who stood frozen in uncertainty. "Tyler, we're leaving. Now. Call the police." Before Tyler could respond, one of the security officers moved to block their path, while another spoke quietly into his radio. Ray felt the situation spiraling out of control, transforming from a maintenance inspection into something far more sinister. "The park opens in less than an hour," Jacob said, checking his watch with exaggerated casualness. "We can't have unauthorized personnel disrupting operations. Perhaps we should continue this discussion in the security office." Ray recognized the implied threat. The security office was at the opposite end of the park, isolated and equipped with holding rooms for troublemakers, or in this case, for witnesses who had seen too much. "I don't think so," Ray replied, mentally calculating his options. 28 years in theme park operations had taught him the layout of service corridors and emergency exits better than most security personnel could ever know. "Tyler, follow me, now!" Without waiting for a response, Ray pivoted and sprinted toward the nearest service entrance, a nondescript door partially hidden behind a decorative boulder. He could hear Tyler's footsteps behind him, followed by the heavier thuds of the security team giving chase. Ray's heart pounded as he yanked the door open and pulled Tyler through, slamming it shut behind them. The service corridor stretched. Before them, a utilitarian concrete passage illuminated by fluorescent lights. "What the hell is happening?" Tyler gasped, clearly struggling to process the sudden turn of events. "I don't know," Ray admitted as they hurried down the corridor, "but those security guys aren't calling the police, and they're way too interested in covering this up instead of investigating it. Something is very wrong here." They reached an intersection where the corridor branched in 3 directions. Ray hesitated only momentarily before choosing the path that would lead them toward the employee parking lot. "They were down there, weren't they?" Tyler asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Those missing kids, the Carter children?" Ray nodded grimly. Their belongings were, and photos of them, recent photos, taken after they disappeared. Someone held them captive in that room, Tyler, right beneath this park, and I think management knows, or at least suspects. The implications hung heavy in the air between them as they navigated the maze-like service corridors. Behind them, they could hear radio chatter echoing, the security team coordinating their pursuit. "We need to get to the police," Ray said as they approached the exit that would lead to the employee lot. "And we need to contact the parents, the Carters." Tyler looked at him in disbelief. "After 6 years, won't that just reopen old wounds?" "If we're somehow wrong about this," Ray stopped short, turning to face his young assistant. "Tyler, I saw what I saw. Those kids were there. Maybe they still are somewhere in the park. Maybe they're—" He couldn't bring himself to finish the thought. Either way, their parents deserved to know the truth. They burst through the exit door into the blinding sunlight of the employee parking lot. Ray's truck was parked in the section, reserved for management, a benefit of his position that now seemed trivial compared to the gravity of their situation. "My car's on the other side," Tyler said, panic edging into his voice as he spotted security personnel emerging from another exit. "Get in," Ray ordered, unlocking his truck with the remote. "We're leaving together." As they peeled out of the parking lot, Ray could see security vehicles mobilizing behind them. He took a hard right out of the park entrance, deliberately choosing the opposite direction from town to buy them time. "Where are we going?" Tyler asked, gripping the dashboard as Ray accelerated down the rural highway. Ray checked his rearview mirror, confirming his suspicion that they were being followed. "First, we need to lose our tail. Then we need to get these photos to someone who can help, someone not connected to the park." A memory surfaced, something from the orientation packet he'd received when accepting the job. The Carter family still lived in Millfield. The father was a vice principal at the local high school. The mother, Ray couldn't remember her occupation, but their address might be findable. "Do you have your phone?" Ray asked, taking a sharp turn onto a side road. Tyler nodded, pulling it out. "Look up Robert Carter, vice principal at Millfield High. We need to find where they live." Tyler's fingers moved quickly across his screen. "You want to go directly to the parents? Shouldn't we go to the police first?" Ray's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Think about it, Tyler. That security team clearly knew about the underground room. They weren't shocked by what I found. They were prepared for it. This has been covered up for 6 years. We don't know who might be involved or who we can trust." The implication hung in the air between them. If park management had been involved in a cover-up this extensive, who else might be complicit? Small towns like Millfield often had close relationships between businesses and local authorities. The park was probably the area's largest employer. "Got it," Tyler announced, holding up his phone. "Robert and Sarah Carter, 1428 Maple Street. About 15 minutes from here." Ray checked his mirrors again. The security vehicles were no longer visible, but he couldn't be sure they weren't still in pursuit. Making a quick decision, he pulled onto a dirt access road that cut through a cornfield. "We'll take the back roads," he said, navigating the truck carefully along the rough track. "Less chance of being spotted." As they bounced along the dirt road, Ray's mind kept returning to the hidden room beneath the Ferris wheel. The carefully arranged belongings, the Polaroid photos, the desperate message scrawled on the wall. 6 years had passed since those children disappeared. Could they possibly still be alive? And if not, what had happened to them? "Ray," Tyler said quietly, interrupting his dark thoughts, "who do you think did it? Who took those kids?" Ray shook his head. "I don't know. But whoever it was knew the park layout, knew about the underground tunnels, and had access to maintenance uniforms. That narrows it down to park employees, probably long-term ones." Tyler was quiet for a moment, processing this. "And security's response? You think they've been covering it up all this time? Or they just started covering it up when the evidence was found?" Ray replied. "Either way, someone at that park knows more than they've ever revealed about what happened to those children." The dirt road eventually merged with a paved county road that would lead them back toward Millfield. Ray drove cautiously, hyper-aware of every vehicle they passed. His phone had been buzzing incessantly in his pocket, likely calls from park. Management demanding to know his whereabouts. "We should probably ditch our phones," Tyler suggested, seemingly reading Ray's thoughts. "They might be able to track us." Ray nodded, pulling over at a small roadside store. "Good thinking. We'll get disposables if they sell them here and leave our work phones behind." Inside the shop, a sleepy-looking clerk barely glanced up as they purchased 2 prepaid phones, a local map, and bottles of water. Ray paid cash, not wanting to leave an electronic trail. Back in the truck, Ray powered down his smartphone and removed the battery for good measure, instructing Tyler to do the same. As they approached the outskirts of Millfield, a new worry began to gnaw at him. "We're about to turn these people's lives upside down," he said quietly. "After 6 years, they've probably reached some kind of, I don't know, equilibrium with their grief, and we're going to shatter that." Tyler studied the local map, tracing the route to the Carters' address. "They deserve to know the truth," he said, echoing Ray's earlier words. Whatever that truth might be, Millfield proved to be exactly the kind of small, tidy Midwestern town Ray had expected. Tree-lined streets named after plants and presidents, a compact downtown with brick storefronts, a water tower visible in the distance. It had an almost deliberate Norman Rockwell quality, the type of place where nothing bad was supposed to happen. "Turn left at the next intersection," Tyler directed. "Maple Street should be 2 blocks ahead." As they drove through the residential neighborhood, Ray tried to imagine what he would say to the parents of 3 missing children. How did one even begin such a conversation? "Hello, I think I found evidence that your children were held captive. Under the Ferris wheel, here are some disturbing photos on my phone. The houses on Maple Street were modest but well-maintained, with neatly trimmed lawns and American flags fluttering from several porches. Number 1428 turned out to be a single-story, ranch-style home with pale blue siding and white trim. A silver sedan sat in the driveway. "They're home," Ray observed, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. He parked across the street, suddenly hesitant. The gravity of what they were about to do, of the news they were about to deliver, felt overwhelming. For 6 years, the Carters had lived with uncertainty, with the particular agony of not knowing what had happened to their children. In a matter of minutes, Ray might replace that uncertainty with something far worse. Maybe we should call first, Tyler suggested, sensing Ray's reluctance. Give them some warning. Ray shook his head. And say what? This isn't something you prepare people for over the phone. Taking a deep breath, Ray opened his door and stepped out into the warm July morning. Tyler followed, and together they approached the front door of the Carter home. The doorbell, when Ray pressed it, played, a cheerful three-note chime that seemed jarringly inappropriate given their mission. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened to reveal a woman in her mid-40s, with tired eyes and streaks of premature grey in her dark hair. She looked at them questioningly, no doubt wondering who these strangers were and what they wanted. "Mrs. Carter?" Ray asked, though he knew instinctively that this was Sarah Carter, the mother whose anguished face had been broadcast across the nation 6 years earlier. "Sarah Carter?" She nodded cautiously. "Yes. Can I help you?" Ray swallowed hard, suddenly, aware of how suspicious they must appear. 2 men showing up unannounced, one of them still in a maintenance uniform with the Dreamland Adventures logo clearly visible. "My name is Ray Dunleavy. I'm the new head of maintenance at Dreamland Adventures, what used to be Wonder World." He saw her stiffen at the mention of the park, her expression instantly guarded. "This is my assistant, Tyler. We found something this morning that I think you should know about." Sarah Carter's face drained of color. Her hand gripped the edge of the door so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Robert," she called over her shoulder, her voice remarkably steady despite her obvious distress. "Robert, you need to come here." Within moments, a tall man with graying hair and the solid build of a former athlete appeared behind his wife. His wary expression suggested he, like Sarah, had learned to be cautious about unexpected visitors, particularly those connected to the place where their children had vanished. "What's this about?" Robert Carter asked, placing a protective hand on his wife's shoulder. Ray took a deep breath. "Sir, ma'am, this morning during a routine inspection of the Ferris wheel, I discovered an unmarked access hatch leading to an underground room. In that room, I found what appears to be evidence related to your children's disappearance." The statement hung in the air, its impact visible in the stunned expressions of both parents. Sarah Carter's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sound. That might have been a gasp or a sob. "What kind of evidence?" Robert finally managed, his voice hoarse. Ray pulled out his phone, unlocking it to access the photos. "Personal items that I believe belong to your children. A Spider-Man backpack, a notebook with a ballerina on the cover, a model rocket, and photographs. Polaroids of 3 children who match their descriptions, taken in that underground room." Sarah's legs seemed to give way beneath her. Robert caught her, guiding her to sit on the small bench in their entryway. Her eyes never left Ray's face, as if searching for some sign that this was a cruel joke or a mistake. "Show us," she demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. Ray hesitated, acutely aware of the pain these images would cause. "Mrs. Carter, they're disturbing. Are you sure?" "Show us," she repeated more forcefully this time. Robert nodded his agreement, his jaw set in grim determination. Ray handed over his phone, the screen displaying the first of the photos he'd taken. Sarah and Robert huddled together, looking at the image of the small table with the children's belongings. Sarah's hand shook as she swiped to the next photo, the wall of Polaroids showing 3 increasingly haggard children. "Oh, God," she breathed, her voice breaking. "It's them! Robert, it's them!" Robert's face had gone ashen, his expression a mix of horror and a terrible, dawning realization. "They were there all along," he said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "Right there under the park, while we searched everywhere else." Sarah looked up at Ray, her eyes burning with a mother's desperate hope. Did you find—" She couldn't complete the question. Ray shook his head. "Just the room and these items. No sign of the children themselves, Mrs. Carter. I'm sorry." A complex wave of emotions crossed Sarah's face. Disappointment at the lack of definitive answers. rekindled hope that her children might still be alive somewhere, and a burning need to see this underground prison for herself. "We need to go there," she said, standing abruptly. "Now. We need to see this place." Robert placed a steadying hand on her arm. "Sarah, wait. We need to call Agent Morrison first, and the local police." Ray exchanged a worried glance with Tyler. "Mr. Carter, there's something else you should know. When I reported my discovery to park security, their response was concerning. They attempted to confiscate my phone and prevent me from leaving the park. They seemed more interested in containing the situation than investigating it." Robert's expression darkened. "You're suggesting a cover-up?" "I'm saying their reaction wasn't normal," Ray clarified. "It wasn't what you'd expect from people learning about evidence in a missing persons case. It was like they already knew something was down there and had procedures in place for keeping it quiet." Sarah's eyes narrowed, a steely determination replacing her initial shock. "6 years," she said quietly. "For 6 years, we've been told there was no trace, no evidence, no leads. If what you're saying is true, if someone at that park knew something and said nothing—" She didn't finish the thought, but she didn't need to. The implication was clear. If the park had concealed evidence about their children's fate, the betrayal was unforgivable. "We need to be careful who we contact," Robert said thoughtfully. "If there's been a cover-up all these years, we don't know who might be involved." Ray nodded in agreement. "That's why we came directly to you instead of going to the police. We weren't sure who to trust." Sarah moved with sudden purpose toward the hallway closet, retrieving a light jacket despite the summer heat. "I'm going to that park," she announced, her tone brooking no argument. "I need to see where they were kept. I need to know what happened to my children." Robert hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'll call Diane Lawrence," he decided. She was Michael's third-grade teacher, and her husband is a state police officer. If we need law enforcement involved, I'd trust him before the local department. As Sarah gathered her purse and car keys, Ray felt a pang of uncertainty. By coming here, by showing them these photos, he had set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. Within hours, possibly minutes, the Carters would be standing in the underground room where their children had been held captive, confronting the horrifying reality of what had happened. And yet, crucial questions remained unanswered. Who had imprisoned the Carter children? What had ultimately happened to them, and why had their captivity been concealed for 6 long years? "We'll take my truck," Ray offered. "I know the park layout, and I can get us to the access hatch without going through the main entrance." Sarah nodded grimly, her expression set with the fierce determination of a mother who had spent 6 years searching for answers. "Let's go," she said. "I've waited long enough." As they filed out to the truck, Ray couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more dangerous than any of them realized. The park's security team would undoubtedly be looking for him and Tyler. The underground room might already be scrubbed clean of evidence, and somewhere in Millfield, the person or persons responsible for the Carter children's disappearance might already be aware that their terrible secret had finally been discovered. Sarah remained kneeling by the fresh concrete, her expression distant as if trying to somehow sense her children through the newly laid barrier. Robert stood beside her, a protective hand on her shoulder, his face etched with a painful mixture of renewed hope and deepening dread. Ray approached them cautiously. "Mrs. Carter," he said gently, "there might be another way to access the tunnels. The system was extensive. There are likely other entry points." Sarah looked up at him, a spark kindling in her eyes. "Show us," she said firmly. "If there's another way to reach that room, we need to find it now, before they seal those off too." The search for alternate access points to the underground tunnels consumed the rest of the morning. Ray led the group through service areas and mechanical rooms. checking blueprints against his knowledge of the park's infrastructure. The state police expanded their presence, securing areas as they went and documenting everything with photographs and video. By early afternoon, tensions were running high. Lawrence had secured an emergency warrant, but the scope was limited to areas directly connected to the Ferris wheel's foundation system. Chambers used this limitation to prevent access to other parts of the park that Ray believed might connect to the same tunnel network. The breakthrough came unexpectedly from one of the park's longest-serving employees, a ride operator named Maria Gonzalez, who approached the search team during a brief break. "I've worked here for 22 years, she told them quietly, glancing around to ensure no management personnel were within earshot. "The old tunnels connect to the pump house for the water rides. There's an access point in the maintenance room behind the log flume." Ray looked at her with surprise and gratitude. "Why are you telling us this?" Maria's expression darkened. "Because I've suspected something wasn't right about those missing children for years, and because the man who was head of maintenance back then, Frank Howell, he always gave me a bad feeling. After those kids disappeared, he started acting strange, nervous. Then one day, he just quit without notice." Inside the maintenance room behind the log flume, they found exactly what Maria had described, a rusty metal hatch set into the concrete floor. Unlike the access point behind the Ferris wheel, this one showed no signs of recent disturbance. With powerful flashlights illuminating the way, Lawrence led the descent into the tunnels, followed by Ray, the Carters, and 2 additional officers. The main tunnel branched in several directions, creating a disorienting maze beneath the cheerful facade of the park above. "This way," Ray directed after orienting himself. "If I'm right, the room should be about 200 yards in this direction." As they proceeded, Sarah gripped Robert's hand tightly, her breathing becoming increasingly shallow. The passage gradually narrowed, forcing them to proceed in single file. Ray led the way now, his familiarity with the morning's discovery making him the most qualified guide. "It should be just ahead," Ray announced, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "Around this bend," and he stopped abruptly, his flashlight beam fixed on the tunnel ahead, where there should have been an opening leading to the room he'd discovered that morning. There was instead a solid concrete wall, freshly poured by the look of it. "No," Sarah whispered, pushing forward to stand beside Ray. "No, no, no." She rushed to the wall, pressing her hands against it as if she could somehow pass through it by sheer force of will. Robert joined her, his own composure finally breaking. As he realized what they were seeing, "They sealed it off," he said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "They sealed the entrance from this side too." Lawrence examined the wall with his flashlight. "This is recent work," he confirmed. "Very recent. The concrete hasn't fully cured yet." As they contemplated their next moves, a strange sound echoed through the tunnel, a rhythmic tapping coming from the other side of the concrete wall. Everyone fell silent, straining to listen. Lawrence pressed his ear to the wall. "It's mechanical, not human," he concluded after a moment. "Probably water, dripping on something metal." Back on the surface, they emerged to find the park in an unprecedented state of disruption. Additional police units had arrived, and park management had been forced to close several attractions in the vicinity of the search areas. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Ray found himself standing with the Carters near the command post Lawrence had established. Despite the frantic activity around them, a strange calm had settled over the couple. "What happens now?" Ray asked them quietly. Sarah turned to him, her eyes clear and focused. "Now we do what we've been doing for 6 years, she replied. "We keep searching for the truth, but this time we know where to look." Just then, a park employee approached hesitantly, an older man Ray didn't recognize. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter?" the man said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Thomas Welch. I worked maintenance here when your children disappeared." He glanced nervously over his shoulder before continuing. "There's something you need to know about Frank Howell," the former head of maintenance, and about the night your children went missing. The Carters exchanged a glance, a spark of hope kindling once more in their eyes. After 6 long years of darkness, the first genuine ray of light had appeared, not just evidence that their children had been there, but potentially a witness who knew what had happened to them and who was responsible. As Thomas Welch began to speak, the starlight Ferris wheel continued its endless rotation above them, its cheerful lights coming on against the darkening sky, still keeping watch over secrets buried deep beneath its foundations, secrets that now, finally, were beginning to emerge into the light. If this chilling story of loss, persistence, and the search for truth has captivated you, please subscribe to our channel for more extraordinary real-life mysteries and stories of courage in the face of unimaginable circumstances. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful narratives to light. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an update on stories that remind us of the resilience of the human spirit and the power of never giving up hope.